On Tuesday, Duke incoming freshman Mackenzie Mbako asked to be released from his national letter of intent. Could the Tar Heels pull a reverse Brandon Ingram on the Blue Devils here?
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, it's Wednesday, April 12th, 2023. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast. I'm your host, Isaac Shade. Joining me, as he does every Wednesday, is our guy, Coach Pack Kilby, coming at you. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Coming up on the show, it ain't just Mackenzie Mbako. Earlier on Tuesday, Carolina got a commitment from Louisville transfer Jalen Withers. We'll unpack that. And also, Pack's got some thoughts about Harrison Ingram and why he is beginning to like him more and more and more. Pack's going to tell us about that. But first, let's talk about this Mackenzie Mbako story. Here's what's going on. You might or might not be aware that on Tuesday, Duke returning sophomore now, Kyle Filipowski, announced that he was going to come back to Duke. Filipowski, what position does he play? Power forward. He plays the 4. Incoming freshman Mackenzie Mbako also plays that position and imagined that he was going to have a whole lot of minutes and a whole lot of shots available to him. In Pack, I don't know if you know how this works, but in college or in basketball, you only can start 5 people and typically just 1 per position. Interesting. So Mackenzie Mbako's like, yeah, I don't want to come be part of that where I'm sitting behind Kyle Filipowski. So he asks to be released from his national letter of intent so he can go elsewhere. In Pack, here's what we learned pretty quickly after that. Tar Heel Illustrated's Andrew Jones, who does a phenomenal job, one of the best Carolina beat writers out there, mentioned that it seems like Carolina is indeed in on Mackenzie Mbako and at least checking in on it, which you got to do. And so from what we're hearing as of the time of this recording, what we're looking at is potentially, and there's going to be other suitors, of course, but right now the 2 most likely front runners in this thing are the Tar Heels and the Louisville Cardinals. There's some bits and pieces to why that all makes sense. But Pat, I want to start with actually looking at his game, because before we get excited about it and talking about why it wouldn't make sense logistically, is this a player you watch film on and think, yeah, he'd be a good fit? Or do you watch film on him and be like, he can go on to Louisville or wherever else?
No, I think he's definitely a good fit. I haven't got a chance to watch a ton of him, but from what I did watch, I mean, he looks like a really smooth shooter.
I'm sorry, what? A smooth what?
Smooth shooter.
Shooter, you say? A stretch 4?
Yeah. We can use one of those in Chapel Hill right now.
Wow.
Yeah. And, I still think he's got enough size and length to be a good defender in multiple positions.
6'8", 210 size-wise, by the way.
Good feet. You can tell that in his shooting, but also just in how he moves with the basketball, how he moves on the defensive end. I think he looks like a crafty shot blocker and defender. And so, to me, I mean, honestly, if we're being real honest about it, I think he could come – if he came to Carolina, I think he would start at the 4.
Right away.
Yeah, right away. I think he's that level of a player. But – we got to get him there first.
You got to get him there. That's a big deal. And so, I mean, as I watch him, all due respect to Pete Nance, he's just more fluid. He's just a better athlete, if we're being honest about it, right? Like, as you said. And so I love what I've seen from him. I've watched him a little bit before, and I'll say why here in just a minute. But I've always thought he is a great basketball player, really fluid, a little bit undersized from what Carolina sometimes use height-wise at the 4, but if you could kind of play a little bit of some interchangeable basketball, depending on, we're going to talk about Jalen Withers a little bit. If Harrison Ingram comes and you've got Jalen Washington, what are some of the possibilities there? We'll look at that, but here's the thing. Let me just give a couple reasons why this makes some sense. There's a young man who was already committed to North Carolina by the name of none other than Simeon Wilcher, who plays at Roselle Catholic in New Jersey, or played. I guess, he's done because he's a senior. My man, Pat Kilby, do you know where Mackenzie Mbako played his high school basketball this season?
I'm going to guess Roselle Catholic.
You're absolutely correct. He and Simeon Wilcher were teammates this year. So I'm furiously texting Simeon's dad, Sergio, on Tuesday, like, dude, you got to get in this guy's ear and get him to North Carolina ASAP. And so we just had some fun texts back and forth. And so we'll see what happens there. So there's that natural relationship already formed on and off the court, which that's not nothing. And I also want to say this. I think people might look at this and say, oh, he won't come to North Carolina because he was committed to Duke. I hear that, and I get why you would say that. Let me introduce you to a young man named Brandon Ingram, who was going to be a Tar Heel from everything we've ever heard until he got worried because of the scandal and, like, is Carolina going to get punished, and ended up going to Duke for his 1 year of college basketball. So if that can happen there, no reason to think that somebody committed to Duke wouldn't be willing to come to North Carolina if things are right. Now, I also don't want to overlook the Louisville of this or other teams, but when you look at Louisville, I know they were terrible this year. And I know it's funny because we're about to talk about one of their players who Carolina just picked up in Jalen Withers, but they've brought in a lot of talent, both in terms of incoming freshmen and transfers. Additionally, Nolan Smith, who was on the Duke staff as they were recruiting Mackenzie Mbako, is now on the Louisville staff. And so there's some natural connection there as well. Pac, do you think the skill set and the athlete that he is would fit well with what we know from some of the other returners? You're thinking about Armando Bacot. You're thinking about RJ Davis. Do you see a natural fit with what they bring?
Yeah, because the thing we really need is someone to be, I don't want to say be Brady Manick, but be similar, stretch the floor.
Provide the same floor stretching capability.
Yeah. And he provides that. And then he may even provide a little more than what Brady did in other aspects as far as guarding multiple positions and athleticism and rebounding. And I mean, he's a true NBA prospect, this Mackenzie Mbako is. So, I mean, this is a real big-time player. And honestly, I mean, he can stretch the floor, which is what we need, but he can do some other stuff too. And
he can move in the lane. He can pull up.
Yeah.
He's hitting from everywhere, folks. Just go watch his tape.
Yeah. I like the word you used earlier, fluid. He's just fluid. He's smooth. He's got multiple things. He's got multiple counters in his game. It's not like he can just shoot. He can take it and put it on the floor, and he's got good footwork, like I mentioned. And so, yeah, I think his skill set fits nicely with what we're looking to do. And I think we're trying to modernize our roster, for lack of a better term, but we're trying to get caught up with today's game. And he's somebody that does that for us. And I think he would be a great fit.
Boy, we'll have to see. And I mean, we'll talk about it, but even after the Jalen Withers commitment, there are still 4 scholarships available. So, I mean, I foresee a world, because remember, Carolina has no wings on the roster. You need these guys, 3s and 4s. You need more front court depth. And so there's no reason to think, oh, we got Jalen Withers. We might get Harrison Ingram. We probably can't get Mackenzie Mbako as well. Oh, you absolutely can get all of these guys. That is a very real possibility here. So don't think that it's not. Going to be really curious to see how this plays out. I got to imagine this is going to move pretty quickly because slots are getting filled up all over the nation as we're in this transfer portal era. So, folks, we're going to have to stay on top of this, keep watching it as we move forward. Well, from a player who might commit to Louisville to one who Carolina just got from Louisville. We're going to talk about this Jae'Lyn Withers commitment a little bit more. Obviously, we talked about him some on yesterday's show. We want to hit that more concretely. And what does it mean? How does he fit the roster? What's his role? All of those questions. We'll get to those in just a second. But first, this episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Grand slams, no-hitters, and double plays are back. There's no better place to get in on the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, new customers can step up to the plate with a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up, place your first bet, and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your bet doesn't win. So go check out all the betting action that's coming up for tonight's games. Whoever the Braves are playing, make sure you get them. Don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Okay, Pack, it became official on Tuesday morning that Jae'Lyn Withers, coming from Louisville, was going to be a North Carolina Tar Heel. We talked about him yesterday, but just some quick recap. He's been through the ringer at Louisville. One of the things we talked about is some of his numbers are questionable, but is that because of him as a player, or is it a result of the experiences he had at Louisville with up and down coaching, with being forced to be different positionally, like came in as a small forward, as a 3, had to move to the power forward, the 4, and has spent some time at center at the 5. And so he's never really been able to spend much time at what he thinks is his natural position. But when he did so last year, he shot 41.7% from 3. And just like Brian Ives, a producer for the ACC Network, great Carolina grad, always has great stats. He tweeted out something later on Tuesday. Jae'Lyn Withers averaged 1.06 points per possession on jump shots last season. That's 77th percentile, 39% on field goals. Both of those percentages last year would have been #1 for the Tar Heels. The Carolina average was 0.88 PPP on jumpers, 14th percentile, 32%. And so, Pack, it feels like initially the noise is with Jae'Lyn Withers. Hey, he's going to come in and be a nice depth piece off the bench or role player at the 3 or 4, wherever it seems to fit the best in whatever lineup Carolina is using. But there's a very real world in which his role on this team, depending on who comes and depending on how he performs in a new place, is the starter on next year's basketball team. How do you see Jae'Lyn Withers fit with next year's roster?
Well, there's a lot up in the air, and you kind of nailed it on the head. A lot of it depends on who comes and who doesn't come. I could see, like you mentioned, I could see him as a starter. I could see him as a role player. Ideally, I think he's a bench player. But I want to preface that with, I think 20 to 25 minutes is not out of the realm of possibility for him. I think he's a good player. I've watched enough to think that he fits our roster in some of the things that we're trying to do. I think he can guard multiple positions. I think he's pretty athletic. I think he's deceivingly good offensively. And so, I think everybody just gets caught up on, Louisville wasn't very good last year, but when you really get down to it, I mean, UConn's leading scorer came from East Carolina. So you just can't look at that all the time and think, oh, he was an average player on a bad team. Well, that doesn't tell the whole story. And I think there's a lot to Withers that will improve at Chapel Hill just because he's going to be surrounded by better players and better talent and, quite frankly, better coaching. And so, I personally, I think it's a good pickup. I just see him as more of a like 6th, 7th man type guy. But that's not a knock. I still think he's a really good player and could be, if Hubert will play him, be 20 to 25 minute type guy.
That's a big if that we don't know at this point in time, but I'm very hopeful that he will and that he'll find his way as part of this team. For those of you watching on YouTube, you know that anytime Carolina gets player movement in or out, I always update the scholarship availability. So for those of you watching, you see it on screen where I've added Jae'Lyn Withers' name to the senior list. This is going to be his 5th year in college, but his first year at Louisville was a redshirt year. So he's only played 3 years. He's got this senior year of availability. Plus, he was in school as the COVID year was given out. So we could have Jae'Lyn Withers at North Carolina for 2 years if he so chooses. And so as you see it right now, both he and RJ Davis are the 2 seniors on the team, both of which have that COVID eligibility. And you don't, it's so interesting, Pack, because you don't have any more than 2 players on this year's team in the same class. In some ways, that's really interesting because you got a nice diversified portfolio there if we're talking stock language. And at this point, you've still got 4 scholarships available. And that to me is some great news. And so, Pack, as you look at the makeup of the 9 scholarship players currently on next year's roster, and I'll leave this scholarship page up so you can look at it if you want to reference that. Carolina has 9 guys with 4 scholarships still to go. What do the Tar Heels still need? How do we add to what Jae'Lyn Withers brings along with everyone else?
Well, I still think, and I know we'll get into this some more in the 3rd segment, but I still think we need scoring on the wing.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've said it a million times. We need to start thinking more Justin Jackson at the 3. And I've used him as an example a lot, but we haven't got that yet. So Harrison Ingram or Dalton Knecht, somebody like that. Honestly, Mackenzie Mbako. He's not – I don't know if he's a 3, maybe more of a 4, but regardless, he can score on the perimeter and he can score with high efficiency. So one of those 3, I think, or all of those 3 would be great additions just because that is a high need for us right now. That should be high on the priority list. And then, you really look at it and you could say, maybe we need somebody that could back up Armando. Or maybe they depend on Jae'Lyn to do some of that. I don't know. But to me, I really think that would be somewhere to look. And I know, at least from what I know, the outside looking in, there hasn't been anyone targeted, to fill that role. But we all know Bacot lives in foul trouble, or at least it seems like he does. So to me, it would be nice to have someone that can play that backup 5 spot. That to me, those are the needs.
Yeah, and that seems to make a ton of sense to me because as you look at it, if you get like those 3 guys that you mentioned, Mbako, Harrison Ingram, Dalton Knecht, and from what it sounds like I was hearing some news on Tuesday that there's some Oregon connections with Dalton Knecht, and so would love to have him, but not so sure how close that is. But let's say you get the other 2 guys, and then you have 2 more scholarships. I would almost advocate for one of those to go to be a Bacot backup, basically. And then it just depends on, do you need more in the backcourt? Is that where you pull the trigger on bringing in Elliot Cadeau a year early? Is it hey, we still need more at the 3, more scoring or shooting at the 3 and 4 position because we want to play more guard-oriented lineups on a more consistent basis? And so I'm with you, Pack. I think it projects that way. Let's get at least 2 more guys that could be 3 or 4 positionally, and then I'm down with another. One of them has to be another front court player, preferably a legit 5 that can back up Mondo. And then beyond that, I think it's just whatever the coaching staff is looking at.
Let me ask you this.
Go ahead.
Do you think that we're fully out on Timberlake? Do you think there's a chance that he comes, or where do you think we stand there?
That's a great question. We didn't even mention him. So we know he was at Kansas this past weekend. We've not heard any news since then. And so that tells me that he's neither immediately ready to commit to Carolina or Kansas, or we probably would have heard one of those on Monday or Tuesday, right after his visit. So what that tells me about Timberlake is that he's still working through things. I wouldn't be surprised if he visited somewhere else, or either that, or he's to the point now where he's like, okay, it's going to be Carolina or Kansas, and I'm still working to make up my mind. And I mean, interestingly enough, we know that Kansas is in on Harrison Ingram as well. So it seems like we could get some Carolina, some Tar Heel Jayhawk battles for both of these guys. And so, I think it's a very real possibility that Nick Timberlake is still a possibility at North Carolina. Great question.
It feels like, to me anyways, that there's been a lot of circulation around whether or not Cadeau is going to reclass and come this year. And then, we've obviously been on Timberlake and had him on a visit, and that's been a possibility. But I just don't personally feel like there's a possibility for both of them to come.
Yeah. Because
we're already heavy in the guard spot. That just feels like a recipe for more people entering the transfer portal moving forward.
I think so. Yeah, because if some of that happens, then it's like, so does DeMarco or Seth leave, right? Right. So, yeah, that's a real question that we're going to have to consider. By the way, Joe Tipton tweeted out the Jae'Lyn Withers news at 8:45 a.m. on Tuesday morning. My days are all running together because there's always things happening. And then about 30 minutes later, RJ Davis tweeted what you see on the screen in front of you for those of you watching. I'll read it for those who aren't. It says, "That's just the start." And that's 30 minutes after the Withers news came out. And then it's got the emoji where the yellow smiley face has a finger up to his mouth, silencing the crowd, right? And in this case, saying like all sorts of things. That silencing is saying like, hey, don't count us out. Keep your mouth shut because there's more, any of that kind of stuff. RJ's leaning into that. So folks, just stay tuned. There is more to come, and you're hearing it from Armando. You're hearing it from RJ. It's going to be a wild ride to see who is coming up next. So Pack, on the show, we've already talked in the past several days and even into last week some about Harrison Ingram, but you and I have not had a chance to talk about Harrison Ingram. I know you've watched some tape on him, and your fondness for this young man has grown the more you've watched him. I want to know why that is, and we're going to talk about it as we get into our weekly Unpacking It segment, and we'll do that in just a second. Okay, we are here with our guy, Coach Pat Kilby, as we always are on Wednesdays. And today, as we wrap up the show, we want to have our Unpacking It segment. And what we want to do is talk about Harrison Ingram, who we are very hopeful will come to North Carolina. Pack, I'm going to just say this for you, that initially you were kind of uncertain or questioning of Harrison Ingram's viability to be a Tar Heel and how it might or might not make sense. But the more and more you've watched him, you've expressed to me that perhaps your opinion on his ability to fit in with this team is changing. Why is that?
Well, let me just walk you through my thought process.
Exactly. I love it.
When I first got wind and word that we were recruiting or looking heavily at Harrison Ingram, the first thing I turned to was looking at his stats. And I was like,
Classic blunder.
Yeah. It's like 10 points per game, 4 or 5 rebounds, 3 assists. And, I was just kind of like, that's pretty similar to Leaky. It's really not all that much different. His 3-point percentage didn't just pop off the screen. I don't remember exactly what it was, so I'm not going to throw a number out there. But it wasn't just like, wow, we need to get this guy, And so immediately my mind went to, okay, he's Leaky offensively, and there's no way he's as good as Leaky defensively. So it seems like we're kind of losing out, But then I went and I checked the transfer portal rankings, and I saw that this kid was ranked 5 spots higher than Caleb Love. I was like, okay, now you've got my attention. So there's something I'm missing here. It seems like the numbers are lying or the rankings are lying. So let's go figure out which one. So then I took to film, And what I saw in film was really encouraging to me. I think he's very smooth. I think he lets the game come to him. He doesn't force a whole lot. And I like that a lot. Just because I think that's kind of what our team needs. I know we point to Brady a lot, but Brady was that way. He never forced the issue. He took what the defense gave him. He just made the right play consistently. And it seems like Harrison has some of that to him. And, I think he's a better shooter than what the stats say. I'll say that. I'm willing to go on record saying that after watching him play. But what really popped off to me when I was watching the videos was he's a really good passer. And he has a high IQ, and he's good at moving without the basketball. And those are things that we desperately need, because I feel like at least this past season, it was a lot of our offense was too stagnant. At times we were too selfish. At times we weren't about getting the best shot. We were about getting our own shot. And so to me, he's just kind of a breath of fresh air. I like the way he plays. I think he fits good on the roster. And I think he's a lot better than what maybe he showed at Stanford, and certainly a lot better than what the numbers show just at first glance. And so now I go back and I'm like, okay, I understand exactly why he was ranked higher than Caleb. I think he's better. They're different. But overall, for Carolina and what we need, I think that Harrison Ingram is better. So that's kind of my thought process on it.
Let me say one thing about assist percentage, and then I've got a question for you about three-point shooting. Assist percentage for North Carolina this past season, the one we just finished, 44.97%, meaning Carolina assisted on just shy of 45% of their field goals. Last season, Hubert Davis's first year, 54.1%. That's 10 percentage points higher. Coach Williams last season, Carolina assisted on 55.3% of their made baskets. So just to prove, have stats back up what you just said, Carolina has to find a way to be more team-oriented with their ball movement. And I think Harrison Ingram is a great piece to be able to do just that. Pack, earlier in the show, you talked about Carolina's need for a Justin Jackson type on the wing. We've talked about that quite a bit. In fact, I talked about it on yesterday's show because you said, I'm not really sure about Harrison Ingram's three-point shooting. Well, he's been just shy of 32% each of his 2 years at Stanford. We look at Justin Jackson, and by the way, he was doing that on about 3 attempts per game from 3. We look at Justin Jackson's numbers. He was low 30s his freshman year, just under 30 his sophomore year, both at around 3 attempts per game. And then his junior year, when he went off, was hitting 37% on 7 attempts per game. Pack, I know that is unique. A lot of times a player tells us who he is by what he does or doesn't do. Is there a world in which Harrison Ingram, just moving to a new place, fresh eyes, fresh team, fresh coaching, whatever it may be, is able to take that kind of leap from deep?
Absolutely. I like your quote. It's a player can tell us who he is by what he does and doesn't do. A player can also tell us very quickly who he is by what he becomes. And, a coaching change, a change in teammates, a change in scheme, a change in confidence can be the difference in jumping 5 percentage points higher from behind the three-point line. A work ethic and getting in the gym and spending time developing your game, taking the right shots versus just taking shots. There's a whole lot that goes into it. To me, I watch Stanford, I watch Harrison play, and I go, okay, these shots that he's taking aren't going to be what he gets at North Carolina. The schemes are drastically different. What I see in Stanford is, or what I see that Carolina has that Stanford doesn't, is Armando Bacot. And just to be, frank about it, teams have to adjust around him.
Yep.
And, Harrison's going to be able to get good looks. And especially if, RJ Davis is out there and Mbako is out there or whoever, just if there's skill around him and Armando, then Harrison's going to get a lot more efficient looks. And you pair that with a work ethic and confidence and being under a new coaching staff and all those things, then we could very easily see that same jump. And I watch him play, and I think his form and his technique and his footwork, I think it all looks good. He was a McDonald's All-American for a reason. He can play. Somebody's just got to bring it out of him. Yeah. And I really genuinely believe the more I watch him play, I think Carolina's the place for that.
Woo! Well, hopefully, even today, we will get some noise. Today being Wednesday, would love that to be the case. Great stuff, Pack, being able to talk today. Mackenzie Mbako, talking about the Jalen Withers commitment. Congrats to him. We didn't even talk about his legacy with his dad being such a good college basketball player. That's incredible. And then, of course, we'd love to be able to get Harrison Ingram and what he could bring, we believe, to this team. But, Pack, that's it for today's episode. Folks, we really appreciate you joining us. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Heels. Follow Pack at Coach_K23 or me at Isaac Shade. Email the show, lockedontarheels@gmail.com. Would love to have more conversations with you. Don't forget to subscribe, smash the like button, and leave your comments on today's episode. We want to know what you think about should we bring Mackenzie Mbako in or not. Folks, I want to remind you, it's always a great day to be a Tar Heel, especially when you get commits coming in, right? That's right. We'll talk again tomorrow, but until then, peace.